TNA Final Resolution 2011 pay-per-view review. As far as my thoughts on this show from TNA, I would say it was more or less just another average show from TNA. I'm not going to say it was a terrible or god-awful show because there were at least a few things that I was entertained by this show. It was just the things that really hurt the show overall was firstly, you had a weak undercard. Going into the pay-per-view, you had a weak undercard, which was expected. Unfortunately, some of the other matches on the pay-per-view just did not live up to the expectations because even though I knew going into the pay-per-view you had a fairly weak undercard because you did have, TV title match, the tag title match, and even the X-Division title match with Aries and Kid Kash, since Aries and Kid Kash just have been having the same boring and dull matches with each other, which isn't really Aries' fault for the most part because it's just Aries just doesn't have any competition in the X-Division title ranks, and Kid Kash is just stuck in that WWE style, and that's why he's not performing to the level he should be doing. Because I liked Kid Kash in his first run in TNA, and then obviously his time in the original ECW just seems like he's still stuck in that style, and it really affects his matches. And the only other person, Aries has been taken on is either Brian Kendrick, which is kind of the same way as Kid Kash, and Jesse Sorensen, which I think he has some potential, but still pretty green in the ring. So those three matches, I think many people weren't expecting too much from. The women's match with Mickie James and Gail Kim, I know some people probably expected a little more from them too because they probably expected maybe at least a very good women's match. It just turned into, unfortunately, just a decent match with them too. I wouldn't say bad. I would say, obviously better than, your typical Divas match or some of your typical knockouts matches you would see in TNA. So it was better than that, but it's just a decent match with them too. With those two talents, you might expect a little more from, but it was at least a decent women's match. Then the rest of the matches, the other four matches, I was actually expecting something from. The opening match with Christopher Daniels and RVD. Them two had a better match at last month's pay-per-view, but it still was a solid opener, so can't really take too much from that match because at least you had a solid opener and it was actually somewhat entertaining. Just I thought they had a better match at the last month's pay-per-view. One match on this pay-per-view that did live up to my expectations actually was a good match, and one match I would say people do need to check out, which is James Storm versus Kurt Angle. That was the one match on this pay-per-view that I actually did feel that was pay-per-view quality and actually was a very, very good match with them too, and especially with Kurt Angle putting over James Storm in that match. I think that was a smart decision, even though I know some people might be like, why did James Storm win the match? And some people like Kurt Angle should have easily won the match and didn't. Some people might have had a problem with that. But I think it was good to have James Storm be put over in that match by Kurt Angle. And then the other two matches, which obviously the cage match with Jeff Jarrett and Jeff Hardy. I know some people probably be like, why would you expect much from them two in a cage match, which might have been expecting a little too much there. I probably turned out probably what they should have done, which was just a decent, close to good match, a good match with them two, just not a great match or anything too memorable. Other than obviously the stipulation of the match, which was obviously Jeff Hardy, very predictable with the stipulations, obviously going to win it because he would get a future title shot, and they weren't going to do the Jeff Hardy getting fired angle. And obviously, we'll just have to wait and see if it's going to be Karen Angle or Jeff Jarrett that gets quote unquote fired in storyline fashion this Thursday on Impact. We'll just have to wait and see for that. But the match with them two wasn't actually too bad. It was just they didn't utilize the cage. And then really the biggest letdown on the pay-per-view, which was this match right here. If it would have been great or even close to my expectations, which was I was hoping at least to get a very good match, maybe even a great match from these two, which was AJ Styles and Robert Roode for the TNA title in a 30-minute Iron Man match. It would have definitely saved the pay-per-view and helped the pay-per-view a lot if it would have been as good as what I expected. Unfortunately, it wasn't. Obviously, AJ Styles is still working through an injury in this match, and he might be kind of overselling it a little more. He might not be as banged up as he was last month, but it probably obviously affects him still going into this match because obviously they didn't try to do too much stuff in this match. At the beginning, pretty much like the first 10 to 15 minutes, the first 10 to 15 minutes was fairly slow. Then it kind of picked up. They started trading pinfalls, and then the match ends in a tie. So like any other Iron Man match, you expect it to go into overtime. It actually didn't. The pay-per-view ends in a draw, which was a bad decision for TNA right there, especially since they had 10 more minutes to play with on the pay-per-view. The match ends in a draw. I know some TNA fans' rationale for this will be, well, they didn't want AJ Styles to lose an Iron Man match since he's undefeated in Iron Man matches. And not only that, it kind of makes Roode seem more heelish that he walked out as champion that way, which I would actually argue it kind of you kind of can go with saying that, but in some senses, I would say Roode walking out the way he did, with it being a draw, not doesn't make him look more of a heel. It actually makes him look even more of a weaker champion, which isn't a good thing since he just recently won the title not that long ago. You want to try to build him up as a strong champion, which they're not doing a good job with that. And it would have been better if you wanted to do the thing where he could have just you could have went either in two directions. You could have went in overtime where he would have just rolled AJ Styles up, got a fluke win, hold his tights or something, and would have walked out that way. Or you could have done that in the last minute or two of the match, especially the last minute. Everyone expected the match ended in overtime, and actually wouldn't have. That would have been a good way to end it there, but they just ended in a draw, which is another thing showing that why does TNA expect fans to go out their way to purchase their pay-per-views when they end their pay-per-views in this fashion where they do a main event for the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. The two performers wrestle each other for 30 minutes, and you're expecting to see some outcome. Whereas a lot of Iron Man matches do go do end in ties almost all the time for the most part, other than probably this match and one other exception that I can think of. Actually an Iron Man match ending in this way, which was in 2005 in WWE with Kurt Angle and Shawn Michaels. Those are the only two exceptions. That one and this one that I can think of. When it actually ends in a tie, it actually ends. They don't do an overtime, which was a bad thing to do, especially in this case, this being on pay-per-view, which really hurts it even more. It comes off even bad if it was on TV, but it would be at least a little better if it was on free television, as instead of being on pay-per-view when you want fans to go out the way to purchase it, which really hurts it right there. So that was the one problem, and it was a very weak Iron Man match. It wasn't much of anything. Like I said, it was very slow for about the first 10, 15 minutes, wasn't much, and they started trading falls and submissions in the match, and it just didn't feel much. You weren't invested into the match. It wasn't exciting. Whenever a pinfall or submission happened, like it should have, it just was a fairly dull match and one of the weakest Iron Man matches I've ever seen. So let me get into the review. The first matchup was RVD versus Christopher Daniels in the opener. This was a fairly good way to start the pay-per-view. Unfortunately, the crowd for this whole entire show was fairly not a good crowd at all. It was a fairly weak crowd overall, but with the crowd. But you kind of expect that a lot of times with the Impact Zone, considering they pretty much see almost all the pay-per-views other than a few each year, and all the TV tapings for the most part always take place there for the most part, other than a few they do outside of the Impact Zone. And the crowd sees pretty much the same thing, so they've seen the same thing so many times, and and the fans see it so often that it's like they're not that enthralled into it. Whereas if you would do it in front of a different crowd, each entire night, where the fans would be obviously more into it instead of doing it in front of pretty much the same crowd, all the time, which obviously hurts the way the fans react to the show, obviously. So like I said, RVD and Christopher Daniels, fairly solid opener. RVD wins the match with the 5-star frog splash, and I would say a 3-star match. The match they had the previous month was a little bit better than this one, but this is still a fairly good match with them too. The next matchup was Robbie E versus Eric Young for the TV title. This was just an Impact match on pay-per-view, which is what you expect with Eric Young and Robbie E. Nothing too special, nothing much to talk about. Robbie E retains the TV title, and I would say about a 1.5-star match. Nothing special at all. Then the next matchup is Devon and the Pope D'Angelo Deniro versus Matt Morgan and Crimson. And actually, Matt Morgan and Crimson, even though the tag team division in TNA has just come to a point where they just throw together a lot of singles competitors. Matt Morgan and Crimson, it's two big guys teamed up with each other, and they actually aren't doing too bad with each other as far as being a tag team. And they do pick up the victory in this match after hitting their tag team maneuver to Devon in this match for the win, so they do retain the TNA Tag Team Championships. And then after this match, they're still obviously playing into this thing that's really seemed like it's dragged out for longer than what it should have, and really terrible storyline. The stuff with the Pope and Devon, and obviously Devon's sons in the crowd. So they're obviously still playing into that angle, which I don't know why they want to, because it's an angle no one's really got into or was interested in the first place. So they should have just completely killed it off. But it looks like they still want to keep it. As far as that tag match, just like the previous match, those two were probably the two worst matches on the pay-per-view. Just like the previous match, about 1.5 stars. Nothing too special with that tag match. Even though, like I said, Matt Morgan and Crimson aren't working too bad as a tag team, though. Considering they're just throwing together a lot of singles competitors as tag teams for the moment right now, other than I guess you would say Inc. and Mexico and America. But the tag team division is very weak in TNA at this point. Then the next matchup was the X-Division Championship. This was Kid Kash versus Austin Aries. Kind of already gave my thoughts on this match. Now, it was more or less the same match you've seen already with Kid Kash and Austin Aries, either on Impact or pay-per-views. Whereas, if it's a singles match or a triple threat, it's just the same match you've seen with Kid Kash and Austin Aries. So just a very bored, dull, repetitive match. It was the same match we've seen before. Nothing too special. And Kid Kash is still stuck in the WWE style, and it really affects the match a lot. Austin Aries, even as good as he is, he's not really pulling out as good of a match he should with them. As even though he's a good performer, you'd expect him to maybe do a little better with Kid Kash, even considering all that. But it's just the same boring, repetitive, dull match we've seen before. Nothing special to talk about there. It's good that Kid Kash didn't win the X-Division Championship, and Austin Aries is still the X-Division champion, but still, they need to do something with the X-Division Championship where Aries actually has some competition. Unfortunately, they're not doing that. I would give the match about 2 stars. It's just the same match we've seen before with Aries and Kid Kash. Then the next matchup was the Knockouts title match. This was Gail Kim versus Mickie James, which actually was a fairly good women's match. Obviously, a whole lot better than your typical WWE Divas match, and kind of better than some of your Knockouts matches you've seen recently. But it still wasn't as good as I think people were expecting. It kind of lived up to my expectations because I wasn't expecting, a very great match with these two. I was expecting, something pretty decent, and that's what I got. And obviously, I knew that Madison Rayne or Karen Angle were to play some role in the ending of the match, which it did. Which was Madison Rayne came out there and pretty much with the help of Madison Rayne, when the ref didn't see, Gail Kim, hits her finisher onto Mickie James and retains the title, which was obviously expected. That was a very predictable ending there. So Gail Kim is still the Knockouts champion. I'll say about 2 1/4 star. It was a fairly decent women's match with them two. Obviously better than some of your typical women's matches, either you've seen in the Knockouts division in TNA or WWE, but still you would expect a little more from them too. But it was fairly decent for what it was decent. It was at least a decent women's match. Then the next matchup was the one match I did think delivered on this pay-per-view, which was James Storm versus Kurt Angle. This was a very good match, good back and forth action. I saw a lot of good mat wrestling in this match, just good counters and everything. I was just really into this match. I was actually expecting a lot going in this pay-per-view for this match, and it didn't disappoint. It was actually one of the matches I thought they could have been the sleeper and stole the show, and actually it did. It was the one match on this pay-per-view that actually was the one match that I would say go out your way to check it out. And I like it that, the end of the match comes when James Storm hit the super kick on Kurt Angle. So Kurt Angle puts over James Storm in this match, and it's a good win for James Storm. Obviously, they'll probably, do this thing with, James Storm and Kurt Angle maybe again. And obviously this will lead to James Storm and probably Robert Roode taking on each other at some time. Maybe they'll do it at Lockdown in April, because I would think that's where they might want to go with them too, since they're obviously building up James Storm right now with obviously a big win against Kurt Angle right here. So that's a good move right there to have Kurt Angle put him over on a pay-per-view right here, and James Storm pick up the victory. And I would say about a 3.5 star match. Definitely the one match you need to check out on here. Then the next matchup was the steel cage match. This was Jeff Hardy versus Jeff Jarrett. Obviously, the stipulation of this match were if Jeff Hardy were to lose this match, Jeff Hardy is fired from TNA. But if he wins it, he becomes he gets a TNA World Heavyweight title shot. And if Jeff Jarrett loses this match, him or Karen Jarrett would get fired. And obviously, very predictable stipulation there. We knew what it was going to be. Jeff Hardy did win this match against Jeff Jarrett, which actually was a fairly entertaining match with these two. Just the one problem I had with they didn't utilize the cage like they should. Obviously, we knew that they were going to do some shenanigans at the end of the match with Karen Angle and stuff. That was to be expected, and Sting as well. So that was nothing too surprising right there. And looks like Jeff Jarrett's going to pick up the win towards the end of the match. They do at least give you the impression that it looks like Jeff Jarrett could have maybe beat Jeff Hardy in this match, and Jeff Hardy was going to get fired from TNA. Obviously, we knew it was going to happen, but they at least made you feel that for a second. And then obviously Jeff Hardy ends up winning the match with the twist of fate to Jeff Jarrett in this match, and I would say about maybe 3 and 1/4 star match. So Jeff Hardy is going to get a TNA title shot, which probably will happen at the next month's pay-per-view, which it'll obviously be it'll probably be a singles match. I would expect Jeff Hardy versus Robert Roode at the next TNA pay-per-view, or maybe with the way the main event ended, maybe a triple threat. We'll just have to wait and see what they do there. And then after the match, Sting comes in the ring, says it's going to be announced this Thursday on Impact, who between Karen Jarrett or Jeff Jarrett is going to get fired. I would expect with it, it could go either way because Jeff Jarrett might want to just take some time off. He might just want to be back off of TV. And considering they just started the whole stuff with the Knockouts division with Karen Jarrett, they might want to keep her around for that. But it could go either way, so we'll just have to wait and see who gets so-called kayfabe fired this Thursday on Impact. Which is another thing right there. With this being a pay-per-view, they should announce it on the pay-per-view instead of making you wait till Impact. But I know that's what TNA's done through the years. They want people to have some reason to turn into Impacts, and that's one of the reasons right there to see what happens there. Even though I know some people might be interested to see what happens, but most people could really care less, what happens with Karen Jarrett or Jeff Jarrett in that manner on Impact. But we'll find out this Thursday on Impact. Then the main event was AJ Styles versus Robert Roode for the TNA title. This was a 30-minute Iron Man match. This was very disappointing. One of the worst Iron Man matches I've ever seen, which is saying something considering AJ Styles is a great performer. Robert Roode I like a lot as well. Obviously, AJ Styles was still working through an injury, so that did affect the match. You got to take that into account, but you expect at this point, this pay-per-view, that maybe AJ would have been a little more healed up or anything, but obviously the injury played some role in this match because the way they worked the match, it was very slow and slow for about the first 10-15 minutes. For mostly half the match, it was very, very slow. Then within 10 minutes of the match was the first fall in this match. With Robert Roode picking up the first fall in this match, and they started trading falls back and forth. Then it got towards the end where it was tied 3-3 within the last couple minutes. Then it looks like at the end, AJ Styles might be able to hit the Styles Clash to walk out of there, being 4-3. He tries to hit the Styles Clash, playing off his injury. His knees buckle. Then after that, Robert Roode in the last minute, 30 seconds, pretty much tries to run the clock out. So he rolls outside the ring. They chase each other outside, get back in there. Then he rolls back out. Then the time ends, and then that's the end of that part right there. It ends 3-3. So with 10 minutes left on the pay-per-view, everyone was obviously expecting 5 more minutes to have some overtime in this match to actually have a clear-cut winner. Unfortunately, we did not get that. The pay-per-view ends with the match ending in a draw, which is a terrible move right there. Now, if you would have did this on television, fans probably wouldn't be shitting on it as much. But doing this on pay-per-view and expecting people to go out their way to buy a pay-per-view, and especially ending a pay-per-view in this fashion, is not a good thing. Because if someone would have bought this pay-per-view, expecting something great out of that match and end it like that, I don't think that fan will probably want to go out of their way and buy the next TNA pay-per-view, considering they pretty much left this pay-per-view with a sour taste in their mouth with the way the ending of the pay-per-view was, with just ending in a draw, which looks really bad for a pay-per-view and not a good move right there for TNA. And even if they would have won in overtime, it would have been maybe a little better because you would have had a clear-cut winner. But match-wise, it wouldn't really affected it too much because the Iron Man match was not good at all. It was very disappointing for the two talents involved. and I would probably give it 2 and 3/4 stars, maybe 3 stars at best, and some people might even say giving it 3 stars might be a little too generous because it wasn't that good. It was one of the weakest Iron Man matches I've seen. So even if it would have had a clear cut winner, it would at least been a little better to say that you actually had a clear cut winner. With Robert Roode just going in there, you could have just had it end in overtime where Robert Roode just holds on to the tights, gets a sneak victory. And just walks out the title that way, or you could have done that in the last couple seconds of the actual 30-minute Iron Man match, and it would have made him look more heelish instead of him looking like a pretty weak champion, which is the impression I got. I know some TNA fans will give some reasoning to this where it doesn't look as bad as what it did, but it did look as bad as it did. Robert Roode looks pretty weak as a champion right here, even though it is a kind of a heelish way to walk out of there, but it instead of making him look like a stronger heel and a coward heel or anything, it just makes him look like a very weak champion right there, where the match ends in that way instead of having a clear cut winner. And that's the one problem I had right there with that. Not only that, the Iron Man match was a bit disappointing. So with that, the one thing on this pay-per-view what did deliver to my expectations was James Storm and Kurt Angle. The main event was really disappointing with the Iron Man match. The cage match was kind of what it was. I was expecting maybe a little better match with Jeff Hardy and Jeff Jarrett, but it wasn't a terrible match. And you had a solid opener. The undercard was pretty much as expected going into the pay-per-view. That's the one part of the pay-per-view that I did expect it to be pretty much as bad as it did. The undercard was fairly weak, but you had a few other things looking good on this, and unfortunately, it just did not deliver. So, I'm not going to say this was a one of TNA's worst pay-per-views or anything, because I think that gets overplayed by too many people. Where when TNA has just an average show or a below average show, fans always label each of them the worst show ever, and I think that's repetitive. Some people saying that. I don't think it's really this was TNA's worst pay-per-view or anything. But it was just an average show, which is not a good thing for pay-per-views. You should always try your best on a pay-per-view, which just didn't seem. It seemed like TNA did not put too much effort into it. And card-wise, I think they, other than some of the undercard matches, there was some stuff on here that could have been good. It just unfortunately didn't turn out to be that way. So overall, I would give it about a 6.5 out of 10, and that's it for my TNA Final Resolution 2011 pay-per-view review. All right, peace.